Nobody's here. Let's pause. Okay, nobody's here, but I'm going to talk anyway, and I'll record it, and I'll post it in this week's section. And so let's look at where we are in the semester so that we can see what's coming up. So we've finished exam 4. We've covered the chapter on evolution. Now we're in a chapter on ecology. Okay, and that's going to lead us to a chapter on human impacts. And so we're going to talk about communities and ecosystems next. I'll say a little bit about populations, but this is all looking at the broader environment that people live in, the effects of many, many people, the effects of the environment on people. And so it's important. We're looking at a broader scope, not so much how the individual body works, but how things work in the long term over many, many years and over huge populations. And so this is a different way to approach things. Okay, and so I'm going to share bits of 2 PowerPoints with us talking about ecology. So let's see. I think first I want to talk about what is ecology. It's the study of interactions of organisms with one another and their environment. And so it's kind of whole organism biology. Instead of talking about how one organism functions, it's about how organisms function in the broad sense. How does one individual affect another individual, whether it's a parent or a child? How does it mean to live in this kind of group or that kind of group? How do groups change over time? How do individuals impact their environment? The energy available in the environment, the nutrients, how do they withstand the environment? So these kind of broader impacts. Ecology is really about connections in nature. And so in ecology, they often talk about competition. Individuals might compete for resources or compete for mates or something like that. Between different species, it might be predation, or sometimes it's working together. One species benefits another. That's a mutualism. And so we also, in ecology, we talk about different scales or different hierarchies. We can talk about individual organisms and their relationships, but also we sometimes talk about groups of the same species. Those are populations. Communities where you have multiple populations living in the same environment. Ecosystems where it includes things like soil and water and weather, and this can affect the whole Earth, the whole biosphere. So first week we talked about populations. It's just a group of individuals of the same species. And here there are really important characteristics. How do they, how many of them are there? What is their population density? How do they tend to interact? Are they living in groups or in territories? Kind of the spacing. How old are the individuals? What part of their lifespan are they in? And changes in the size of the population. Okay. Natural populations, it's important for us to study them because we use them as a source of food or materials. Last week's forum was on fish, on cod and sustainable management. We know sometimes you can harvest too many fish, and so a sustainable resource can essentially be eliminated. It can be mined, and that leads to threatened and endangered species and populations that decrease in size. And so here's the graph showing the population decrease in cod over a period of years, and really a population that's never recovered. Natural populations are sometimes stable, but sometimes they're cyclic. Sometimes they're eruptive, where they increase dramatically. And so biologists talk about what affects population growth and decline and cycling. They also talk about why some species sometimes become very, very abundant. We often refer to these as invasive. In population sizes, there are two models, two mathematical models for showing population growth. One is exponential, where populations grow and grow and grow. And so as the population gets larger, there are more offspring that are born. And so the larger the population grows, the faster it grows. And in other cases, there are limiting factors. So the population only grows quickly up to a certain size, and then they're limited, maybe by water or nesting sites or disease or something like that. So the exponential growth is unlimited. The limited growth is referred to as logistic, and then there's a carrying capacity for the environment. Most organisms show at least some sort of limitation, okay, and usually they're limited by density dependent factors, things that uh, depress the population when the population is high. These are like predators or competition for food, availability of food. Disease is transmitted faster when there's more individuals. Sometimes the things that limit organisms are act independent of density. These can be like weather storms, winter, but also in geological events, things like that. And then we talked a lot about populations in the textbook. Populations can have an age structure, and so not all populations are the same. Sometimes populations um, will look different at different times, and so if it's growing rapidly, there'll often be lots of young individuals. Um, but if it's stable, the number of young individuals will be enough, just enough to replace older individuals. And so the population will look kind of a very uh, like a building almost, not like a pyramid, but like slowly tapering towards the top. And in declining populations, there are too few young people and too many older people. Okay, and this can happen with animals, but for us, we're talking about people. And so we can recognize populations that are growing quickly by their age structure. Um, the United States is expanding slowly overall, but in some areas, the populations are growing rapidly, and in some areas, they're actually declining. Okay, in Northern Illinois, the population is gradually declining. We have more older people than we have young people. And both expanding rapidly and declining populations have particular problems. Um, in expanding rapidly, you have lots of, in those populations, there's not enough education, there's not enough job opportunities for young people. Um, you have potential problems that young people have. In declining populations, there's not enough labor. Um, that there may be not enough people to do the jobs that need to be done. You may have lots of problems with diseases that affect old people. Um, and so these are particular things, and it's not the same everywhere in a large country like the United States. Okay. Um, when we talk about population growth, some populations are set to grow very quickly, that they produce, each individual adult produces lots of offspring very, very quickly. And it's worth noting that humans are the opposite. We're kind of like elephants. Okay, it takes us a long time to get ready to breed. Okay, we have one offspring at a time, and parents generally take care of those offsprings for years and years and years. Usually, more than 20 years. Often, um, will parents and will have a lifelong relationship with their offspring, and will be helping them long past the time when they reach adult size. And this is typical of some animals, and it's typical of people, that we're social and we have these characteristics, and it's best when those situations are like that. Okay, so we can predict growth of plant and animal populations. There's two basic models. We know factors that affect population size, like density-dependent factors. They limit populations that get large. Some organisms can increase rapidly, and they often are invasive, and they produce lots of offspring quickly. Other organisms have um, kind of life history characteristics that suggest that they're not able to withstand population exploitation, that they'll decrease if they're at all put under any pressure. Okay, so I'm gonna close this one. Let's see. Don't say. Let's share another one. Okay. Okay. So, and then in some, with some organisms, they're, we talk about more often communities or ecosystems. And this includes all the species that occur in one location and may interact. It's like a forest or a grassland. And not only do we talk about the organisms, we talk about the environment. And there we might mention things like niche, that organisms do certain jobs, things like that. But that we talk a lot about species interaction, things like competition, predation, and mutualism. That for species, a big part of what they do is how they interact. And some of these interactions can be positive. Humans are really dependent on lots of other species. We're mutualists with many different organisms. We show adaptations for drinking milk, for eating cheese. These are adaptations for using animals as a source of protein, dairy animals. But we also show adaptations for um, getting along well with horses and dogs. We've domesticated crops, plants that we use as sources of food. And so this involves adaptation. In the case of crop plants, they hold on to their seeds, they don't drop them. It's one of the key adaptations. We don't want to have to dig through the dirt to get the food. And so we change the plant so it holds on to its seed and doesn't drop it until we're ready to take it. And not only do we do this with plants and animals, but we do it with fungi like yeast. We use yeast for lots of things to to make bread, to make wine, to make things more digestible, to preserve them. And so we're really good at this. Um, and so it's an important thing. And let me see here. I want to say a little bit about ecosystems too, because we can also study energy and nutrient cycles and food chains and things like that. And we know that energy that's first captured in plants by the producers winds up in animals that eat the plants, the grazers. And then that some of that energy can wind up in a carnivore, a consumer. But there's always less and less energy as we go along a food chain. And so there's always more energy in the grass than there's in the grasshoppers. And then there's always more energy in the grasshoppers than there are in the carnivores that eat them, or secondary carnivores. And so there's always some energy lost when you go along a food chain. This is really important because more food is available if we eat plants or if we eat animals that eat the plants than if we try something out. So this gives rise to what we call an energy pyramid. Another way to look at the environment is to talk about the movement of particular chemicals through the physical environment and the organisms. And this illustration here shows the water cycle. Okay, for us, movement of these chemicals are really important because they determine productivity of plants, and we need water ourselves to drink. So we talk about where the chemical might be in the environment, the non-living reservoir, or where it's stored in organisms. We can sometimes call these a living reservoir. And the movement of these chemicals are by physical processes and by the organisms themselves. These are called nutrient cycles or biogeochemical cycles, and they're really important for living organisms, and often life plays a crucial role. Organisms help these chemicals move, like carbon and nitrogen. Plants can take carbon out of the air. Bacteria, uh, like the bacteria that live in the root nodules of soybeans, that's what you're looking at here, they can take nitrogen out of the air. Plants can also put water back into the air, and they can decompose other organisms so that they can release carbon. And so these are really, really crucial things. We're going to talk about these cycles like the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle when we talk about human impacts. And so I just wanted to mention those. All right, I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that's helpful. There's a lot to read in chapter 23, where again, it's talking about the bigger impact of humans. This is a branch of study called ecology, and it's really important. And it's important because we're changing our environment. There's so many people doing so many things that we have a big impact on the environment. And that's what we're going to talk about in the final week is human impacts. Okay, I'm going to stop there and I'll post this and we'll hopefully see you next week.